Welcome to the Diving In podcast. I'm your host Beth, and I'm here to dive headfirst into the abstract concepts, theories and ideas introduced by some of the world's greatest thinkers. In today's episode, I'm going to be diving into Michael Rosen's reading, doing, thinking concept, introduced in his 2014 Royal Society of the Arts Commencement. I'll be exploring its meaning, applications to our education system, and solutions of how to encourage our youngest generation to love reading. Michael Rosen is an author, columnist and educator. He's been the UK's Children's Laureate, publishing over 100 children's books. He spans ages and genres and consistently demonstrates a lively characteristic that conveys his love for children's learning. There's a lot to say about the richness of his repertoire, and there's also a lot to say about the other half of his working life as a leading commentator on the institutional and political issues existing within the UK's national education system. His passionate and sometimes interrogatory approach to campaigning for children's education quality has been a consistent thread in his career, from a radio show host in the 1970s to a frequent tweeter in the 2020s. So it's not surprising that the internet is saturated with countless interviews, articles and columns about Rosen's political discourse. Today's material of the RSA Commencement encapsulates the essence of his work, demonstrating how true wisdom is won from a lifelong process of learning through investigation, imagination and discovery, which he argues through the reading, thinking, doing concept. In true Rosen style, which I might call Rosenianism, I don't want to take this concept at face value, even coming from a mind as disciplined as his. I'm going to take a deep breath before critically diving into the issues he highlights within the UK education system, with reference to various critical arguments that he's made in his other commentary pieces. The reading, doing, thinking thesis means to reinforce all cognitive and epistemological efforts with practical applications to improve their educational quality and harness a lifelong practice of critical thinking and discovery. Well, that sentence suffers from what Rosen might call terminology-itis, so I'll break it down. He applied this concept to his own learning. One should not only be reading a playtext, but doing and thinking it by envisaging how it would be staged, as the source is intended to be actively performed. He also applies this to his theoretical efforts as an educator, not only reading a poem to a primary school assembly, whom he calls his harshest critics, but doing and thinking the poem by performing and acting it with his whole body. This is what Rosen calls his children's stand-up. By doing the poem, it gets the children into doing the poem with him and thinking its language, implications and characters, absorbing additional skills of memory, recall, empathy, speech motor skills and confidence, which are all tick-box learning objectives on an English curriculum. So there's a priority here of active over passive involvement in all activity as a discipline that allows the individual to constantly discover, imagine and learn. Rosen isn't unprecedented in theorising active-led pedagogy, as supported by the work of other pedagogists such as Robinson, Chomsky and Freire. With different theoretical titles, each of these educators supports the reading, doing, thinking concept. A learner must be encouraged to develop a practice of independent thinking and doing to prepare them for a life of self-actualisation, but in Freire's case, social justice. However, it's unanimously agreed by these educationalists that independent thinking can only be achieved in a learning environment that goes against what Robinson calls the manufacturing model. In this model, which Rosen argues is cemented into UK education system, learners only succeed if they can passively repeat information, follow authority and tick test boxes, prioritising a school's market performance over the educational quality for the child in that system. It's a conveyor belt regurgitating clones without individual or critical thinking skills that are malleable for labour within capitalism and neoliberalism. Rosen argues that teaching reading without the thinking and doing is pointless because without the skills of independent thought, they are unfit to progress into a world exploding with systemic issues of inequality. Let's dive deeper. It's pointless and problematic to exclude the thinking and doing from teaching children the reading. But how has this happened if leading educationalists so passionately warn against this? Since the 2010s, the UK marked a new era of the reading national curriculum, with the dominance of synthetic phonics. Phonics focuses on reading and repeating the connection between sounds and letters, which is not a balanced doing and thinking approach of children reading whole texts and understanding the meaning of the words. This is merely decoding, not reading for understanding, a symptom of the manufacturing model. Although it's important that children understand letters and sounds, there's little evidence to suggest that phonics is foolproof. It excludes other critical reading skills, and common words like she and the have to be taught as exceptions. Teachers across the UK are under pressure to live and breathe phonics, replacing entire English lessons to make sure children do well on phonics tests, which is symptomatic of another institutional issue that Rosen highlights, of literacy policies gobbling up and diluting the separate subjects of literature and reading. Both should be given equal time and quality. It's fundamental for a child's development. Within these phonics screening checks, children read nonsense words, judged to be reading the appropriate sounds over doing and thinking their meaning. Therefore, children are not learning to be doing and thinking whole texts or developing their confidence at reading independently, which is what Rosen's entire career is dedicated to improving. Phonics is a relatively young reading methodology, but one-size-fits-all teaching processes have existed in the education system since Thatcherism, with a legacy of nationwide reading inequality. This is disadvantageous for children with special educational needs, and those within low socioeconomic areas of the UK can't access specialist reading support. J. Blades testimonies experiencing reading inequality in his documentary of learning to read at 51 years old. Like 8 million other adults in the UK, he flew under the radar of dyslexia support at school. He was branded stupid and unteachable, and he was pushed off the conveyor belt and left school with no qualifications and the reading ability of a young child. This demonstrates Rosen's belief that as adults, we shouldn't underestimate the influence of school on adult life. So who does Rosen think causes reading inequality? He explains that language belongs outside of ourselves. It belongs to the invisible knowers who set tests, to the invisible writers of scripts that teachers appear to use. Rosen is a frequent commentator on the omnipresence of anonymous authority in classrooms and how educational quality is at the whims of ministers who chop and change curricula in a cycle of political terms. Often, those that write these policies and pressure teachers into living and breathing phonics have never been an educator or stepped foot inside a classroom. So they themselves execute little more than passive reading of their policies because they have not done the doing and thinking of a classroom. Rosen further argues that children's literature is trivialised and not taken seriously by the ivory tower of English departments because these ministers trivialise children. They invalidate their little brains and little experiences. Rosen argues that the more we patronise and isolate children's literature as a discipline, the more it loses its wealth of critical encouragement for children. Merely do the reading without the doing and the thinking. And this fails our children because it does not prepare them for life outside school. Okay, I am running low on oxygen, so let's get back up to surface to figure out some solutions to these crushing pressures. Rosen's reading, doing, thinking concept supports the notion of employing critical pedagogy in English lessons. Like Rosen, usury argues that the goal of children's literature are usually defined by educators, but using children's literature for development of critical thinking goes beyond the aesthetic realm and provides children with some of the best sources of insight into personality and culture. For example, a teacher could simulate a Freirean dialogical learning experience through facilitating child-led discussion exercises. This encourages the child to be doing and thinking independently, sharing inner feelings with a character, using logical and creative thinking to make judgments on a story, separating opinion from fact, and developing listening abilities. This goes against the manufacturing system because these skills develop the child's open attitude towards life's problems. A critical pedagogy is also more beneficial to the teacher for measuring progress than the current system of regulated phonics and SPAG tests because it's more individualised to the skill set of every child. A New York Times article on how to raise a reader argues that a critical reading pedagogy can go beyond the classroom into the home environment, where parents can literally make their children into book lovers by asking them questions, reading together, allowing books to be strewn all around the house, and introducing books with a balanced menu of subjects, diverse characters, and storytelling techniques. Rosen directly proposes another solution in describing language as a playground. Although reading language appears to be controlled by policymakers, language does not exist in fact or stone. It's something malleable that belongs to us. We have the right and necessity to be doing and thinking and discovering and changing it. Rosen encourages children to think abstractly about language, to make a magpie board at home or in the classroom of words they find exciting and interesting, to keep their minds open to discovering their meanings, and ultimately to encourage their own brains to adapt to the discipline of reading, doing, thinking. This is summarised in his concluding concept of literature activism, where all humans can become doers and thinkers by campaigning for the importance of children's literature, which will improve educational quality and decrease reading inequality in the UK. Thanks for joining me on today's dive into Michael Rosen's reading, doing, thinking concept at his RSA Commencement, the problems it highlights within our education system, and how we and our children can become literature activists. This is one of many arguments that are accessible for free online, so I recommend looking into more of his unrelenting work, campaigning for the quality of children's education. Hope is not lost for our youngest generation. We can do something about it. Let's be readers, doers, and thinkers.